Machiavelli once wrote, "Men are so simple and so dominated by immediate needs that he who deceives will always find someone willing to be deceived." I learned this lesson the hard way when my business partner Mark disappeared with our company's funds in 2019. What shocked me wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how predictable it had been and how blind I'd chosen to remain. I'd noticed the signs 3 months earlier. Mark started asking unusual questions about our client contracts, wanting to know payment schedules and renewal dates. He'd developed this habit of checking his phone constantly during meetings, always stepping out to take important calls. His wife later told me he'd been meeting with lawyers and setting up offshore accounts, but at the time I told myself he was just stressed about the business. The neuroscience behind betrayal fascinates me now. Our brains operate on 2 systems, the emotional system 1 that craves trust and belonging, and the rational system 2 that should protect us. System 1 desperately wants to believe people are good, while System 2 gets overwhelmed by daily decisions and basically takes a nap. That's why we miss obvious warning signs until it's too late. Here's what I've learned. Betrayal isn't a character flaw in some people. It's basic human mathematics. When someone calculates that the benefit of betraying you outweighs the risk of consequences, multiplied by whatever loyalty they feel, the decision becomes automatic. It's not personal, it's just mental accounting that happens below conscious awareness. I started studying historical cases after my experience with Mark. Julius Caesar's partnership with Pompey fell apart when Rome became too small for both of them. Steve Jobs got pushed out of Apple, then came back and systematically removed the board members who'd betrayed him. Mark Zuckerberg diluted Eduardo Saverin's Facebook shares when he became inconvenient. In each case, the betrayal was mathematically inevitable once conditions aligned. The statistics are brutal. Research shows that 73% of corporate betrayals happen between partners or within families, and the warning signs typically appear 30 to 90 days before the actual betrayal occurs. I could have protected myself if I'd understood this data back then. Instead, I learned it through expensive experience. Looking back, Mark's betrayal followed a predictable pattern. His eye contact dropped by about 40% during our conversations, something I noticed but dismissed. He started maintaining more physical distance when we talked, unconsciously stepping back during discussions about company strategy. His voice changed when mentioning future plans, becoming slightly higher and more rushed. The worst part wasn't losing the money, it was realizing how many people around me had seen it coming. Sarah from accounting told me later that she'd noticed irregularities in expense reports. My mentor, James, had actually pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay with Mark, but I'd brushed off his concerns. Even my wife had mentioned that Mark seemed different lately. But here's where it gets interesting. Not everyone who shows these signs actually betrays you. Marco Antony trusted Cleopatra completely and lost Rome to Octavian as a result. Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos was eventually betrayed by her own employees when they became whistleblowers. Bernie Madoff's own sons turned him into the FBI. Sometimes misplaced trust is just as dangerous as justified paranoia. The key insight that changed everything for me was understanding that betrayal isn't something that happens to you. It's something that reveals information about human nature and motivational structures. When someone betrays you, they're showing you their real priorities and decision-making process. That data is actually valuable if you know how to use it. After the dust settled with Mark, I restructured how I approach all relationships. I document agreements, create mutual dependencies, and most importantly, I maintain what I call trust with verification. I still trust people, but I've built systems that make betrayal expensive and obvious. It's not paranoia, it's just better architecture for human relationships. The fascinating thing about betrayal is that once you understand its mechanics, you start seeing the early warning system that's always been there. But recognizing the signs is only the first step. Knowing what to do when you spot them requires a completely different skill set, which brings us to something even more crucial. Machiavelli warned us to presume that all men are bad and will use their malice whenever they have the opportunity. After what happened with Mark, I became obsessed with learning to read people's intentions before they acted on them. I started paying attention to micro changes in behavior, and what I discovered was like developing a sixth sense for detecting danger. The breakthrough came during a team meeting last year when I noticed something subtle about my colleague Jennifer. She'd always been enthusiastic about our quarterly reviews, asking detailed questions and taking notes. But this time, she kept checking her phone and seemed distracted when we discussed upcoming projects. More telling was how she suddenly became very interested in our client contact lists, something she'd never cared about before. I'd learned that there's a predictable timeline to betrayal. The decision happens internally first, usually 30 to 90 days before the actual act. During this window, people start sending unconscious signals because they're mentally preparing for the shift. It's like they're already halfway out the door, even if they haven't admitted it to themselves yet. Jennifer started responding to my emails more slowly, which was unusual for her. She'd gone from replying within hours to taking a full day or more. When I'd suggest grabbing coffee to discuss projects, she'd suddenly have scheduling conflicts. These weren't dramatic changes, just subtle shifts that most people would dismiss as someone being busy or stressed. The most revealing change was in how she talked about our company's future. She used to say, "When we launch the new product," or "our strategy for next year." Now she was saying, "When you guys launch," or "your strategy." The language shift was tiny, but it showed she was already mentally distancing herself from the team's success. I started testing my theory with small observations. During meetings, Jennifer would agree with everything too quickly, without her usual thoughtful questions. She'd nod along enthusiastically, but her eyes had that distant look, like someone who's already made up their mind about something bigger. It reminded me of how Mark used to act right before he disappeared. Then came the questions about other opportunities in our industry. Jennifer started asking hypothetical questions about different companies, salary ranges, and whether I'd ever consider moving to a competitor. She framed it as casual conversation, but I recognized the pattern now. She was gathering intelligence about my plans, while testing how I'd react to the idea of people leaving. The final confirmation came when she started being overly friendly with people she'd previously ignored. Jennifer suddenly became interested in chatting with Sarah from accounting, and even started having lunch with people from other departments. She was building relationships that would survive her departure, creating her exit network while still collecting her paycheck from us. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, Jennifer announced she was leaving for a position at our main competitor. What made it a betrayal wasn't just the departure, it was that she'd clearly been planning it for months while pretending to be fully committed to our upcoming product launch. She'd even volunteered to lead the marketing strategy, knowing she'd be gone before implementation. The interesting part was how she tried to control the narrative afterward. Jennifer insisted it was a sudden opportunity that she couldn't pass up. But I had documented evidence of her behavioral changes going back 3 months. Her timeline didn't match her story, and several team members mentioned they'd suspected something was up for weeks. Looking back at historical examples, this pattern holds true everywhere. Napoleon's intelligence network detected Talleyrand's shift in loyalty years before Talleyrand made his move. Jeff Bezos reportedly identified key executives who were planning to leave Amazon and replaced them proactively. The signs are always there if you know what to look for. The revelation that changed everything for me was understanding that people telegraph their intentions through unconscious behavioral changes. They can't help it. Once someone makes the internal decision to betray, their brain starts preparing them for the new reality. They begin distancing themselves emotionally and practically from their current situation. But recognizing these signals is only valuable if you know what to do with the information. Sometimes, the best defense isn't trying to prevent the betrayal. Sometimes, it's making sure you strike first. Machiavelli taught us that it is better to be feared than loved, if we cannot be both. But what he didn't mention is that sometimes you need to disappoint people to save yourself from drowning with a sinking ship. I learned this during the most difficult business decision of my career, when I had to essentially abandon my co-founder David to save our startup. We'd been building our software company for 2 years when it became clear that David couldn't scale with the business. He was brilliant at the technical foundation, but as we grew from 5 to 20 employees, his management style was driving people away. 3 of our best developers had already quit, citing David's micromanagement and inability to delegate. I watched our company culture deteriorate week by week. The breaking point came during a client presentation in Chicago last fall. David interrupted me 6 times, contradicted our agreed-upon strategy in front of the client, and essentially sabotaged a deal worth $200,000. After we lost the contract, I realized that staying loyal to David meant betraying everyone else who depended on the company, our employees, our other investors, our customers. I spent 3 weeks documenting everything before making any moves. I recorded instances of David's behavior affecting team morale, saved emails showing client complaints, and tracked our declining performance metrics. I wasn't building a case to destroy him. I was building evidence that change was necessary for survival. The data was undeniable. We were failing because of leadership dysfunction. The conversation with David was one of the hardest I've ever had. I explained that our roles needed to evolve, that the company required different leadership skills now than it had 2 years ago. I offered him a choice: transition to a pure technical role with equity protection, or we'd need to restructure his involvement entirely. He felt betrayed, but I'd rather have an angry ex-partner than a dead company. What made this strategic evolution rather than destructive betrayal was how I handled the aftermath. I didn't badmouth David to investors or employees. Instead, I publicly credited his technical contributions and helped him transition to a consulting role where his skills were better suited. I even referred him to 2 other startups that needed his specific expertise during their early stages. The key was controlling the narrative honestly. I explained to our team that David and I had different strengths, and the company's needs had evolved beyond our original partnership structure. Most people had already noticed the problems, so my explanation felt like overdue honesty rather than sudden betrayal. I focused on David's contributions while acknowledging that roles needed to change. 6 months later, our company culture had completely transformed. We hired a proper CTO who could manage technical teams effectively, our employee satisfaction scores improved dramatically, and we closed 3 major deals that David's management style would have killed. The financial results spoke louder than any justification I could have offered. David initially resented the change, but within a year he admitted it was the right decision. His consulting business was thriving. He was working with technologies he loved, and he didn't have to deal with management responsibilities he'd never enjoyed. Sometimes what feels like betrayal in the moment turns out to be liberation for everyone involved. The historical parallels are everywhere. Reed Hastings publicly explained why Netflix had to abandon DVDs before actually doing it, giving customers time to understand the transition. Satya Nadella spent months communicating why Microsoft's culture needed to change before implementing new strategies. They made evolution feel inevitable rather than arbitrary. What I learned is that strategic evolution requires 3 elements: documentation of why change is necessary, honest communication about the new direction, and genuine efforts to help affected parties find better situations. If you can explain your decisions to your children without shame, you've probably chosen evolution over betrayal. The most important insight was realizing that sometimes loyalty to one person means betrayal of many others. True leadership means making decisions based on the greatest good, even when it disappoints people you care about. But there's an even more sophisticated principle at play when you're not the one initiating change: understanding how to build relationships that make betrayal not just unlikely, but actually counterproductive for everyone involved. Machiavelli observed that he who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner effects his ruin than his preservation. I discovered the brutal truth of this when my former boss Rachel systematically fed me false information while extracting real intelligence from our team. The worst part wasn't losing a promotion. It was realizing how long I'd been playing poker while everyone else could see my cards. It started innocently enough during our weekly one-on-ones in early 2020. Rachel would ask detailed questions about my projects, timelines, and client relationships. She positioned it as mentorship, wanting to understand my work so she could advocate for me with upper management. I shared everything openly, thinking transparency would build trust and advance my career. Meanwhile, Rachel was giving me carefully curated information about company strategy and department changes. She'd mention that leadership was really impressed with my work, or that there might be opportunities opening up soon. I later learned she was telling 3 other managers the exact same things while we were all competing for a single director position that she'd known about for months. The asymmetry became clear during a strategy meeting where I confidently presented ideas that Rachel had encouraged me to develop. What I didn't know was that she'd already pitched similar concepts to the CEO 2 weeks earlier, positioning herself as the strategic thinker while making me look like I was copying her work. She'd used my insights to enhance her own proposals. I started noticing the pattern when I realized my confidential conversations with Rachel was somehow becoming common knowledge among other managers. Details I'd shared only with her would surface in meetings I wasn't invited to. She was collecting intelligence from our entire team and redistributing it strategically to serve her own agenda. The breakthrough moment came when I overheard Rachel on a conference call talking about challenges with team communication, using specific examples I'd shared with her in confidence. She wasn't breaking trust maliciously. She was running an information economy where my openness was her currency. I was giving away valuable data while receiving manufactured reassurances in return. I decided to test my theory by sharing different false information with Rachel and other colleagues, tracking what circulated back to me. Within 2 weeks, I could map exactly how information flowed through our department. Rachel was the central hub, collecting real data and distributing selective versions that served her interests. Once I understood the game, I flipped the script. I started asking Rachel strategic questions that seemed innocent but revealed her actual plans. Instead of sharing my real concerns, I fed her information that would benefit me if it circulated. I became more selective about what I revealed and when, treating information as a strategic resource rather than a trust-building tool. The transformation was dramatic. Within 6 months, I'd positioned myself as someone who knew more than I revealed, rather than someone who revealed more than I knew. Other managers started coming to me for insights because they'd noticed I had information they couldn't access elsewhere. Rachel's information network became less valuable when people realized she wasn't the only source. Historical examples of information asymmetry are everywhere. Cardinal Richelieu maintained power by controlling what French nobles knew about each other's activities. Michael Eisner at Disney used his access to industry intelligence to negotiate better deals while keeping competitors in the dark. Anna Wintour built her fashion empire by deciding what information reached the public and when. The modern digital version of this is even more sophisticated. Companies like Facebook and Google built entire business models on information asymmetry, knowing vastly more about users than users know about them. Cambridge Analytica demonstrated how information asymmetry could influence political outcomes on a massive scale. What I learned from the Rachel experience was that information asymmetry isn't just about collecting data. It's about understanding who knows what, when they learned it, and how they're likely to use it. In any relationship or organization, the person with the clearest picture of information flow has disproportionate power. The key insight that changed how I approach all relationships was realizing that people reveal their true priorities, not through what they tell you, but through what they choose not to tell you. Information gaps are often more revealing than information itself, but understanding information asymmetry is just the foundation. The real danger comes from the people who have unlimited access to your vulnerabilities. Machiavelli warned that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can understand what they feel. The most devastating betrayals always come from people who have complete access to your vulnerabilities. And I learned this lesson when my own brother Kevin nearly destroyed my business by sharing confidential information with my biggest competitor. Kevin had been helping me with bookkeeping for my consulting firm since 2018. He knew everything: client contracts, profit margins, upcoming bids, even personal financial struggles I was facing during the pandemic. I trusted him completely because Well, he was family. Blood was supposed to mean something, and I'd helped him through his own difficult divorce just 2 years earlier. The betrayal started small, in ways I didn't recognize at the time. Kevin began asking more detailed questions about specific clients, not just for bookkeeping, but about their business strategies and future plans. He'd casually mention things like, that Johnson Industries deal sounds complicated, or, are you sure Peterson Group is financially stable? I thought he was just being thorough. What I didn't know was that Kevin had been struggling financially since his divorce and had quietly started working part-time for Meridian Solutions, my primary competitor in the healthcare consulting space. He wasn't deliberately trying to hurt me initially. He was just trying to survive. But proximity to my business intelligence made him incredibly valuable to them. The access Kevin had was extraordinary. He processed my invoices, so he knew exactly what I charged different clients. He saw my expense reports, revealing which conferences I attended and which prospects I was courting. He even had access to my calendar through our shared Google Workspace, giving him real-time updates on my meetings and travel schedule. I started noticing strange coincidences around March of last year. Clients would mention that Meridian had approached them with proposals remarkably similar to mine, often just days after I'd submitted my own bids. When I lost the Peterson Group contract, their feedback mentioned concerns about my pricing strategy, using almost identical language to internal emails I'd sent Kevin about that specific deal. The pattern became undeniable when I tracked several lost opportunities back to Meridian underbidding me by exactly 10 to 15%, suggesting they knew my exact pricing structure. They weren't just competing with me, they were using my own intelligence to systematically undercut every major proposal I submitted. The confrontation happened over dinner at Mom's house during a family gathering. I'd prepared for weeks, documenting timelines and gathering evidence. When I laid out the pattern, Kevin initially denied everything, then broke down and admitted he'd been sharing general industry insights with Meridian. He claimed he didn't realize how specific the information was or how they were using it. What made Kevin's betrayal so devastating wasn't just the financial damage, though I lost approximately $80,000 in contracts that year. It was the realization that someone with complete access to my vulnerabilities had weaponized that trust systematically. Every conversation we'd had about business challenges had become intelligence for my competitors. The family dynamics made recovery incredibly complicated. Mom insisted we work it out because family comes first, while Dad quietly told me I should have been more careful about mixing business with family relationships. Kevin wanted forgiveness without fully acknowledging the scope of the damage or taking responsibility for the systematic nature of his information sharing. I've since learned that proximity-based betrayals follow predictable patterns throughout history. Brutus was like a son to Caesar, using that emotional access to get close enough for assassination. Iago's destruction of Othello worked because of their close military partnership. Delilah's betrayal of Samson required intimate access to discover his weaknesses. Modern examples are everywhere too. Bernie Madoff was eventually brought down by his own sons when they reported his Ponzi scheme to the FBI. Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos was exposed by employees who had insider access to her deception. The people closest to us have the greatest power to either protect or destroy us. What I learned from Kevin's betrayal was that emotional proximity creates cognitive blind spots that rational analysis would never allow. We give family members, close friends, and intimate partners access that we'd never grant to strangers, then fail to monitor how that access is being used. The solution isn't paranoia, it's compartmentalization and verification systems, even within close relationships. The most important insight was understanding that betrayal from those closest to you isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's just opportunistic. Kevin didn't set out to destroy me, but when financial pressure created opportunity, our family relationship became a resource he could exploit. Which brings us to a crucial question. How do you create loyalty structures that make betrayal not just unlikely, but actually counterproductive for everyone involved? Machiavelli taught us that it is necessary to be a fox to discover the snares and a lion to terrify the wolves. After Kevin's betrayal taught me how dangerous blind trust could be, I became obsessed with creating relationships where loyalty wasn't based on emotion alone, but on genuine mutual benefit. The goal wasn't to control people through fear. It was to build structures where everyone won more by staying together than by leaving. The opportunity came when I started my next venture with two partners, Lisa and Marcus, in late 2021. Instead of just hoping they'd remain loyal, I designed our partnership structure so that each person's success was genuinely dependent on the other's continued involvement. We didn't just split equity equally. We created complementary roles that made the business stronger with all three of us than with any two. Lisa handled all client relationships and business development. She had the network and the sales skills that Marcus and I completely lacked. Marcus managed our technical, infrastructure and product development with specialized knowledge that would take months to replace. I focused on operations and strategy, maintaining the systems that kept everything running smoothly. None of us could easily replicate what the others brought to the table. The key was creating what I call beneficial interdependence rather than toxic dependency. We structured our equity so that it vested over 4 years with acceleration clauses that rewarded staying together through major milestones. If someone left early, they'd forfeit significant value. But if we hit our growth targets together, everyone's shares became more valuable than they could achieve independently. We also shared our professional network strategically. I introduced Lisa to my former clients who needed her expertise. She connected Marcus with potential technical partners, and he helped me access software tools and resources I never could have afforded alone. Our individual reputations became intertwined. Success for one meant success for all, and failure for one threatened everyone's standing. The difference between this approach and what I'd experienced with Kevin became clear during our first major crisis. When a key client threatened to cancel their contract over a technical issue, instead of pointing fingers or protecting individual positions, all three of us immediately collaborated to solve the problem. Lisa handled client communication, Marcus fixed the technical issue, and I managed internal damage control. What made our loyalty structure sustainable was transparency about our mutual interests. We had quarterly reviews where we openly discussed how the partnership was working for each person, what value we were getting, and what we needed more of. Nobody had to guess whether they were benefiting from the arrangement. The data was clear and the conversations were honest. This approach has historical precedents everywhere. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger built their 60-year partnership on complementary skills and shared intellectual curiosity. Bill Gates and Paul Allen created Microsoft by combining Gates's business vision with Allen's technical expertise, making each other more successful than either could have been alone. Their loyalty was based on mutual benefit, not just personal affection. The contrast with toxic dependency structures is stark. Stalin created so much fear that his subordinates were paralyzed and ultimately sabotaged his regime. Harvey Weinstein used intimidation and blackmail to control people, which eventually created the coalition that destroyed him. When loyalty is based on fear rather than benefit, it becomes brittle and eventually explosive. 6 months into our partnership, we faced our first test when a larger company tried to recruit Lisa with an offer that doubled her potential income. Instead of panicking or trying to guilt her into staying, Marcus and I worked together to restructure our deal so that Lisa's compensation increased along with her contributions. We made staying more attractive than leaving, not through manipulation, but through genuine value creation. The psychological principle that makes this work is simple. People remain loyal when the relationship genuinely improves their lives. If someone can achieve their goals better with you than without you, betrayal becomes irrational. But if they're staying only because they fear consequences or feel obligated, resentment builds until it explodes. What I learned from building this partnership was that sustainable loyalty requires 3 elements: genuine mutual benefit, transparent communication about interests and expectations, and continuous adaptation as people's needs evolve. You can't build loyalty once and expect it to last. It requires ongoing maintenance and optimization. The most important insight was realizing that the strongest relationships aren't built on promises or emotions, but on systems that make cooperation more profitable than competition. But even the best loyalty structures can't protect you from every threat. Sometimes you need to recognize when evolution becomes necessary, regardless of existing relationships. Machiavelli observed that a prince must not have any other object nor any other thought, nor must he take anything as his art but war and its orders and discipline. I learned the truth of this when I had to make one of the hardest decisions of my professional life, leaving my business partner Tom behind when our company needed to evolve beyond what our partnership could support. Tom and I had built our marketing agency together from nothing back in 2017. He was brilliant at creative strategy and had an intuitive understanding of brand messaging that I could never match. For the first 3 years, we were perfectly complementary. I handled operations and business development while he crafted the creative vision that won us clients. Our partnership felt unbreakable. But by 2020, the industry had shifted dramatically toward digital marketing and data analytics. Our clients needed sophisticated campaign measurement, programmatic advertising, and conversion optimization, technical skills that neither Tom nor I possessed. I started hiring specialists and learning these new competencies, while Tom resisted what he called the soulless quantification of creative work. The breaking point came during a presentation to our biggest client, a retail chain worth $300,000 in annual billing. They needed a comprehensive digital transformation strategy, and I'd spent weeks preparing data-driven recommendations. Tom interrupted halfway through to pitch a brand storytelling approach that completely ignored their stated objectives. We lost the client that afternoon. I spent the next month documenting how our partnership had become misaligned with market realities. Tom's resistance to digital marketing wasn't just personal preference. It was actively damaging our ability to serve clients effectively. 3 other prospects had mentioned concerns about our old-school approach during recent pitches. The data was undeniable. We needed to evolve or die. The conversation with Tom was brutal. I explained that the agency needed different leadership for its next phase of growth, and that his skills would be better utilized in a pure creative director role rather than as an equal partner. I offered him options: transition to a consulting arrangement with equity protection, or we could restructure the entire partnership to reflect our new market position. Tom felt betrayed, which I understood completely. From his perspective, I was abandoning our original vision and pushing him out of the company we'd built together. But I'd learned from my experience with David at my previous startup. Sometimes loyalty to one person means betrayal of everyone else who depends on the business, including our 12 employees. What made this evolution rather than destruction was how I managed the transition. I spent 6 weeks helping Tom establish his own creative consultancy, referring 3 potential clients to him, and publicly crediting his foundational contributions to our agency's early success. I made sure his departure looked like natural progression rather than forced removal. The key was controlling the narrative honestly. I explained to our team and clients that Tom and I had different strengths, and the agency's needs had evolved beyond our original partnership structure. Since everyone had witnessed our strategic disagreements, my explanation felt like overdue clarity rather than sudden betrayal. I focused on Tom's creative legacy while acknowledging that leadership roles needed to change. 18 months later, both businesses were thriving. Our agency had successfully transitioned to digital marketing, landing 2 major clients who specifically chose us for our data-driven approach. Tom's creative consultancy was working with startups and smaller brands who valued his storytelling expertise. The market had room for both approaches, just not within the same company. Historical examples of necessary evolution are everywhere. Reed Hastings publicly explained why Netflix had to abandon DVDs months before actually doing it, giving customers time to understand the inevitable transition. Satya Nadella spent a full year communicating why Microsoft's culture needed fundamental changes before implementing new strategies. They made evolution feel inevitable rather than arbitrary. The most important lesson was learning to distinguish between personal loyalty and fiduciary responsibility. As a business leader, my primary obligation was to the company's survival and growth. which meant making decisions that served the greater good, even when they disappointed people I cared about personally. Evolution isn't betrayal when it's genuinely necessary for survival. What I discovered through this experience was that strategic evolution requires 4 elements: clear documentation of why change is necessary, honest communication about new directions, genuine efforts to help affected parties find better situations, and maintaining respect for past contributions, even while changing future roles. The ultimate test is whether you can explain your decisions to your children without shame, but even the most ethical approach to evolution can't eliminate all relationship challenges. Sometimes the people closest to you have motivations and pressures you don't fully understand, which means you need sophisticated methods for identifying what truly drives the important people in your life. Machiavelli wrote that, "Fortune is a woman, and it is necessary, if you wish to, keep her under, to beat her and ill-use her." I used to think this was about dominating circumstances, but after being systematically destroyed by my former business partner Amanda in 2019, I learned it really means you have to fight back against adversity with calculated intelligence, not emotional reactions. Amanda and I had spent 2 years building what seemed like the perfect partnership in executive coaching. She handled client acquisition and program development, while I managed operations and delivery. We were generating close to $400,000 annually and had a waiting list of Fortune 500 executives wanting our services. I thought we were building something permanent together. The betrayal was methodical and devastating. Over a 6-month period, Amanda quietly renegotiated contracts with our biggest clients, gradually removing my name from agreements and positioning herself as the sole service provider. She convinced 3 key clients that I was planning to leave the partnership, creating a narrative that justified transitioning to her exclusively. By the time I discovered what was happening, she'd stolen 70% of our revenue. My first instinct was pure rage. I wanted to expose Amanda publicly, sue her for breach of contract, and make sure everyone in our industry knew what she'd done. I spent 2 weeks drafting angry emails, preparing legal documents, and planning a social media campaign that would destroy her reputation. But my mentor James told me stopped me cold. Revenge is a dish best served strategic. Instead of reacting emotionally, I forced myself to analyze the situation like a chess problem. Amanda had won the first round by being more calculating than I was. If I wanted to recover and eventually win, I needed to be even more strategic in my response. Emotional reactions would make me look unstable and give her ammunition to justify her narrative about my unreliability. The first step was damage control. I documented everything Amanda had done, but kept the evidence private while I figured out how to use it effectively. I reached out to former clients personally, not to badmouth Amanda, but to let them know I was continuing to provide executive coaching services independently. 3 of them immediately expressed interest in working with me again. Within 60 days, I'd established relationships with 2 other executive coaches who specialized in different areas than Amanda and I had covered. Instead of trying to recreate our old model alone, I built a network of complementary specialists. My new approach was actually more sophisticated and offered clients broader expertise than our original partnership had provided. The psychological transformation was crucial. I stopped seeing Amanda's betrayal as something that happened to me and started viewing it as information about how business partnerships could fail. Her actions revealed weaknesses in our original structure that I could design better systems to prevent. Every painful lesson became data for building stronger relationships in the future. 6 months after Amanda destroyed our partnership, my new coaching network was generating more revenue than our original business had ever achieved. I'd learned to diversify client relationships, create redundant systems, and build partnerships with clear documentation and mutual accountability. Amanda had actually forced me to evolve into a more sophisticated business leader. The most satisfying moment came a year later, when Amanda approached me about collaborating on a project. Her exclusive client relationships had proven unstable without my operational expertise, and several executives had specifically asked to work with me again. I politely declined, explaining that I'd moved beyond that model. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Historical examples of strategic recovery are everywhere. Winston Churchill was betrayed by his own Conservative Party after World War I, but used the experience to build broader coalition support that made him indispensable during World War II. Steve Jobs was expelled from Apple, but founded Pixar and returned to save the company with superior vision and experience. What I learned from the Amanda situation was that betrayal creates two possible outcomes. It either destroys you or forces you to evolve rapidly into someone stronger. The difference is entirely in how you respond during the first critical weeks after discovery. Emotional reactions lead to destruction. Strategic analysis leads to transformation. The key insight that changed everything was understanding that recovery isn't about getting back to where you were before the betrayal. It's about using the experience to build something better than what existed originally. Amanda's betrayal forced me to develop skills, relationships, and systems that made me more successful than our partnership ever could have. The most important lesson was learning to see betrayal as accelerated education rather than personal attack. When someone betrays you, they're giving you valuable information about human nature, relationship dynamics, and your own vulnerabilities. That data becomes incredibly valuable if you know how to process it strategically rather than emotionally. But recovery is only half the equation. The other half is learning to identify people's real motivations before you give them the opportunity to betray you in the first place. Machiavelli taught us that everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. After Amanda's betrayal taught me how dangerous it is to misread people's true intentions, I became obsessed with understanding what actually drives the important people in my life. The skill that saved me from future betrayals wasn't learning to distrust everyone. It was learning to see past what people say to what they actually want. The breakthrough came during my first major hiring decision after rebuilding my coaching business. I was interviewing Sarah, a talented consultant who seemed perfect for a partnership role. She talked passionately about making a difference in executive development and building something meaningful together. Her words were exactly what I wanted to hear, but something felt off about her energy when discussing long-term commitment. I started paying attention to inconsistencies between her stated values and actual behavior. Sarah claimed to prioritize collaborative partnership, but during our working sessions, she consistently steered conversations toward her individual achievements. She said money wasn't her primary motivation, yet she asked detailed questions about revenue projections and profit-sharing structures during our second meeting. The real tell came when I mentioned other executive coaches I'd worked with. Sarah's body language shifted immediately. She leaned forward, asked probing questions about their client bases and pricing models, and made subtle comments about market opportunities they might be missing. She wasn't interested in collaboration. She was conducting competitive intelligence while positioning herself for our partnership. I decided to test my theory by sharing different information with Sarah and two other potential partners, tracking what questions each person asked and how they responded to various scenarios. Sarah consistently focused on extraction, what she could learn about my methods, clients, and industry connections. The others focused on contribution, what value they could add to make our partnership successful. What I learned was that people reveal their true motivations through micro-behaviors that contradict their stated intentions. Sarah talked about long-term partnership while asking short-term exploitation questions. She claimed to value collaborative growth while demonstrating competitive intelligence gathering. Her actions showed she was evaluating me as a resource to be mined, not a partner to build with. The psychological principle behind this is fascinating. Most people aren't consciously deceptive. They genuinely believe their stated motivations while unconsciously pursuing different goals. Sarah probably thought she wanted partnership, but her behavior revealed she was actually motivated by individual advancement and resource acquisition. The gap between conscious intention and unconscious drive is where the truth lives. I started applying this analysis to everyone in my professional network. My client Robert claimed to value strategic thinking, but he consistently made impulsive decisions and rewarded quick fixes over long-term planning. His real motivation was immediate problem-solving and short-term relief, not strategic development. Understanding this let me serve him more effectively. Another client, Jennifer, said she wanted work-life balance, but she constantly checked emails during family time and scheduled calls during vacations. Her actual motivation was control and staying connected to every decision, not balance. Once I understood this, I could structure our coaching sessions around helping her delegate effectively rather than trying to force artificial boundaries. The key insight was realizing that people's real motivations usually align with their behavioral patterns, not their verbal declarations. Sarah's pattern was information extraction. Robert's pattern was immediate gratification. Jennifer's pattern was control maintenance. Once you identify the pattern, you can predict how someone will behave in new situations. Historical figures demonstrate this principle everywhere. Steve Jobs claimed to value user experience, but his behavior showed he was actually motivated by aesthetic, perfection, and creative control. Understanding his real drives explained why he made decisions that seemed contradictory to user convenience, but aligned perfectly with design purity. Modern examples are just as revealing. Mark Zuckerberg talks about connecting the world, but his behavioral patterns show someone motivated by data acquisition and platform control. Elon Musk claims to want sustainable transportation, but his actions reveal someone driven by technological achievement and public recognition for innovation. What changed everything for me was learning to observe people's patterns over time, rather than believing their immediate explanations. Sarah eventually left our potential partnership to join a larger firm where she could access more resources and connections, exactly what her behavioral patterns had predicted she'd do. The most valuable skill I developed was learning to identify what I call motivational misalignment, the gap between what people think they want and what they actually pursue. When someone's behavior consistently contradicts their stated goals, their behavior is telling you the truth about their real priorities. This became my most reliable predictor of who I could trust with significant responsibilities. But identifying people's motivations is only useful if you know how to respond strategically to what you discover. The real question becomes, how do you protect yourself when you realize someone's true drives might eventually put them in conflict with your interests? Machiavelli advised us to know how to use well the nature of the fox and the lion, but he never had to navigate a world where your private conversations could be screenshot and shared globally within minutes. I learned the brutal reality of digital betrayal when my former colleague Jake used our private Slack messages to destroy my reputation and nearly end my consulting career in 2022. Jake and I had worked together at a marketing firm for 3 years before I left to start my own consultancy. We'd maintained a friendly relationship, regularly exchanging industry gossip and client insights through private messages. I trusted him completely. After all, we'd supported each other through difficult projects, late-night deadlines, and office politics for years. Our digital conversations felt as private as face-to-face discussions. The trouble started when I landed a major client that Jake's current company had been pursuing. In a private message, I jokingly mentioned that their proposal had been surprisingly weak and that I'd won the contract easily. Jake responded with laughing emojis and congratulations, seeming genuinely happy for my success. I thought nothing of sharing a moment of professional triumph with an old friend. 3 weeks later, screenshots of our conversation appeared on industry social media, accompanied by Jake's commentary about my unprofessional attitude toward competitors. The images showed my comments about his company's proposal, but conveniently omitted his encouraging responses and the broader context of our friendly relationship. I looked arrogant and unethical, while Jake appeared to be the whistleblower exposing bad behavior. The digital pile-on was swift and devastating. Other consultants shared the screenshots, adding their own commentary about toxic industry behavior. Potential clients started questioning my character. During sales calls, 3 existing clients asked pointed questions about my approach to competitor relationships. My professional reputation, built over a decade, was crumbling because of a private joke taken completely out of context. What made Jake's betrayal particularly sophisticated was how he controlled the narrative. By posting the screenshots himself with moral commentary, he positioned himself as someone who couldn't stay silent about unethical behavior, rather than someone betraying a friend's confidence. The digital format made my words seem more calculated and malicious than they'd actually been in our casual conversation. I realized that digital communication had created new vulnerabilities that previous generations never faced. Every message, email, and video call could potentially become public evidence if relationships went wrong. The permanence and shareability of digital conversations meant that casual comments could be weaponized years later when circumstances changed. The recovery required a completely different approach than traditional betrayal situations. I couldn't just have private conversations to rebuild relationships. The damage was public and permanent. I had to create equally public content demonstrating my actual character and professional standards. I started writing industry articles about ethical competition and collaborative business practices. More importantly, I had to fundamentally change how I communicated digitally. I implemented what I call the screenshot test. Before sending any message, I asked myself how it would look if shared publicly without context. I started being more thoughtful about written communication while saving sensitive discussions for phone calls or in-person meetings. The broader implications became clear as I researched other cases of digital betrayal. Employees had been fired for private social media posts shared by former friends. Executives had lost deals because confidential emails were leaked to competitors. Politicians had seen careers destroyed by recordings of private conversations. The digital age had made betrayal easier, faster, and more devastating than ever before. Historical examples of information warfare pale in comparison to modern digital betrayal. Cardinal Richelieu needed networks of human spies to gather compromising information, while today, anyone with a smartphone can record and instantly distribute private conversations. The tools of betrayal have become democratized and amplified beyond anything Machiavelli could have imagined. What saved my career was understanding that digital reputation management requires proactive defense rather than reactive damage control. I started building positive digital presence before I needed it, creating content that demonstrated my values and professional approach. When Jake's attack came, I had existing evidence of my character that contradicted his narrative. The most important lesson was learning to treat all digital communication as potentially public, not out of paranoia, but out of strategic intelligence. Every email, message, and social media post should reflect the person you want to be perceived as, because in the digital age, perception often becomes reality regardless of your intentions. But digital betrayal is just one modern evolution of an ancient pattern. The more sophisticated challenge is building systems that make betrayal not just unlikely, but actually counterproductive for everyone involved. Machiavelli warned that he who despises what is done for what ought to be done prepares his destruction rather than his preservation. After surviving betrayals from Mark, Amanda, Kevin, and Jake, I finally understood that hoping for loyalty wasn't a strategy. Building structural immunity against betrayal was. The goal wasn't to become paranoid, but to create systems so robust that betrayal became expensive, obvious, and ultimately counterproductive. For anyone considering it, the transformation started with what I call redundancy architecture. Instead of having one trusted bookkeeper like Kevin, I split financial oversight between 3 different people who didn't know each other. My accountant handled tax preparation, my virtual assistant managed routine expenses, and I personally reviewed all major transactions. No single person had enough access to damage me significantly without detection. I applied the same principle to client relationships after Amanda's theft. Instead of allowing any partner to control entire client accounts, I implemented a system where multiple team members had direct relationships with each client. When I started working with Lisa and Marcus in our coaching network, we agreed that all major clients would know and work with at least 2 of us, making it impossible for anyone to quietly transfer relationships. The digital lessons from Jake's betrayal led me to create what I call communication. Protocols. All sensitive business discussions happen during in-person meetings or phone calls, never in writing. When I must discuss confidential information digitally, I use encrypted messaging apps that delete conversations automatically. I treat every written communication as potentially public evidence. But the most sophisticated element was developing what I call early warning systems. I track behavioral changes in key relationships using simple metrics: response times to messages, frequency of communication, types of questions being asked, and changes in meeting patterns. When someone's engagement pattern shifts significantly, I investigate rather than assume everything is fine. The breakthrough insight came from studying Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger's 60-year partnership. They built immunity not through contracts or monitoring, but through aligned incentives and complementary strengths. Each person became more successful with the other than either could be alone. I started designing all my important relationships around this principle of mutual amplification rather than mutual dependency. I created value overlap in every significant professional relationship. With my current business partner, Rachel, we structured our roles so that her network marketing expertise enhances my operational systems, while my process management amplifies her creative strategies. Neither of us could easily replicate what the other brings to our partnership, and both of us achieve better results together than separately. The financial architecture became equally sophisticated. Instead of shared bank accounts that could be drained like Mark did to me, we use escrow systems for major projects and milestone-based payments that require dual authorization. Our equity structures include vesting schedules that make early departure expensive, while acceleration clauses reward long-term collaboration. Most importantly, I developed reputation interdependence with key partners. Rachel and I co-author industry articles, speak at conferences together, and maintain joint client relationships where our individual reputations are publicly linked. Betraying me would damage her professional standing in ways that extend far beyond our partnership, making the cost-benefit analysis unfavorable for potential betrayal. The psychological component was learning to distinguish between healthy caution and destructive paranoia. I don't assume people will betray me, but I structure relationships so that betrayal becomes irrational rather than opportunistic. When someone can achieve their goals better with me than without me, and when betraying me would cost them more than cooperating, the mathematics work in my favor. Historical examples of structural immunity are everywhere. Benjamin Franklin maintained simultaneous relationships with different political factions, making himself valuable to all while being controlled by none. Otto von Bismarck created alliance systems where attacking Germany meant fighting multiple enemies simultaneously. They built safety through strategic positioning rather than hoping for loyalty. The most significant change was learning to view relationship design as seriously as business strategy. I spend as much time architecting partnership structures as I do developing marketing plans or financial projections. The people closest to you have the greatest power to help or hurt you, so those relationships deserve the most sophisticated design and monitoring. What surprised me was how this systematic approach actually improved my relationships rather than making them feel cold or transactional. When people understand that our success is genuinely intertwined, they invest more energy in collaborative problem-solving and mutual support. Clear structures create trust by making expectations and incentives transparent. The final test came last year when a competitor tried to recruit Rachel with an offer that doubled her potential income. Instead of panicking or trying to match their offer, I was confident in our structural design. Rachel turned them down because leaving would cost her the network we'd built together, the reputation we'd established jointly, and the systematic advantages that made her more successful with me than she could be anywhere else. But even the most sophisticated immunity systems can't eliminate every risk. There are times when betrayal becomes mathematically inevitable despite your best structural design, and in those moments the most strategic response isn't defense, it's making sure you act first. Machiavelli observed that men judge generally more by the eyes than by the hands, because all can see and few can understand what they feel. After years of experiencing, analyzing, and systematically protecting against betrayal, I finally understood the ultimate paradox. Betrayal isn't the enemy to be avoided. It's the teacher that never lies about human nature. Every betrayal I've survived has transformed me into a more sophisticated strategist and, surprisingly, a better person. The revelation hit me during a quiet moment last spring while reviewing my business growth over the past 5 years. Mark's financial betrayal had forced me to develop redundant systems that made my next company bulletproof. Amanda's client theft had taught me to build partnerships based on mutual benefit rather than blind trust. Kevin's family betrayal had shown me how to compartmentalize sensitive information without becoming paranoid. Jake's digital attack had made me a master of reputation management and communication strategy. Each betrayal had been painful in the moment, but looking back, I could see how they'd accelerated my development in ways that years of smooth relationships never could have. I'd learned more about human psychology from people who deceived me than from those who remained loyal. Betrayers reveal information about motivation, decision-making, and self-interest that loyal friends would never willingly share. The key insight that changed everything was understanding that there are 3 levels of strategic consciousness. Level 1 is the naive belief that people are fundamentally good and trustworthy. Level 2 is the cynical assumption that people are fundamentally bad and untrustworthy. Level 3 is the strategic recognition that people are fundamentally predictable when you understand their real motivations and structural incentives. Most people get stuck oscillating between naivety and cynicism, never reaching the sophisticated understanding that allows you to work effectively with human nature as it actually is, rather than as you wish it were. Betrayal is what forces this evolution. It shatters naive assumptions while providing concrete data about how people really make decisions under pressure. I started seeing betrayal as advanced education rather than personal attack. When Mark disappeared with our funds, he taught me exactly how financial theft happens and how to prevent it. When Amanda stole clients, she showed me the specific techniques used to redirect relationships and how to build immunity. When Kevin shared confidential information, he revealed how family access can be exploited and how to maintain appropriate boundaries. The most valuable lesson came from understanding that betrayal always reveals more about the betrayer than the betrayed. Mark's theft showed his inability to build value independently. Amanda's client manipulation revealed her lack of genuine relationship-building skills. Kevin's information sharing demonstrated his financial desperation and poor judgment. Jake's screenshot attack exposed his need to tear others down rather than building himself up. This perspective transformed how I approach all relationships. Instead of fearing betrayal, I became curious about people's real motivations and structural positions. Instead of avoiding potential betrayers, I learned to work with them strategically while protecting myself appropriately. Instead of seeking revenge against those who betrayed me, I focused on using their lessons to build better systems. The sophisticated insight that emerged from years of analysis was recognizing that true strategic mastery isn't about avoiding betrayal. It's about understanding human nature so deeply that you can predict, prepare for, and sometimes even benefit from other people's self-interested decisions. When you know how people really think and what they really want, you can create situations where cooperation becomes more profitable than competition. My relationship with Rachel exemplifies this evolution. We didn't build our partnership on promises of loyalty or emotional bonds. We structured it around complementary strengths, aligned incentives, and mutual benefit creation. Our loyalty exists because betraying each other would be financially and professionally irrational, not because we made romantic commitments about friendship. It's more reliable because it's based on reality rather than idealism. The historical pattern is consistent everywhere. Leonardo da Vinci navigated between rival patrons by making himself valuable to all while being controlled by none. Talleyrand survived the French Revolution, Napoleon, and the Restoration by understanding that political loyalty was temporary, but strategic value was permanent. Winston Churchill transformed multiple betrayals by his own party into opportunities to build broader coalitions and demonstrate superior judgment. What I've learned is that the people who become true strategic masters aren't those who avoid betrayal. They're those who use betrayal as data about human nature and relationship dynamics. They build loyalty through systematic value creation rather than emotional manipulation. They create trust through structural alignment rather than personal promises. The ultimate irony is that understanding betrayal so completely has made me more capable of building genuine relationships than I ever was during my naive period. When you know how easily people can justify betraying their commitments, you appreciate those who choose loyalty despite having alternatives. When you understand how self-interest really works, you can create partnerships where everyone's self-interest aligns with collective success. The greatest betrayal of all would be using this knowledge to become manipulative or destructive. The real mastery comes from understanding human nature so deeply that you can build systems where betrayal becomes unnecessary, where everyone achieves their real goals more effectively through cooperation than competition. That's the ultimate strategic victory, creating a world where wisdom about betrayal makes betrayal itself obsolete.